Hello, welcome to Scary Thoughts, Horror, Philosophy, Culture. I'm Mark Cate.
And I'm Chad Lott.
This is episode 91 of Scary Thoughts. We're going to be discussing the Netflix special by Burnham from 2021 titled Inside. You can email us at whatthe@scarythoughts.org. That's two T's, WHATTHE at scarythoughts.org. And do you have anything to plug?
Man, I do not. I just do my own life, and that's what I do.
Sweet. I do my own life, and it results in things that I want to plug. My band, My Heart an Inverted Flame, the band I do with Andy Connors. This year, we are doing this EP series where we are releasing an EP every month for 12 months. And this Friday, July 16th, 2021, we are going to be releasing Volume 3. And the EP collection is called A Collection of Essays Attempting to Describe in Intricate, Exhaustive Detail Everything That Was Ever Wrong with the World. And so we're at Volume 3 starting this month, and then it'll just continue to 12. Come over to My Heart an Inverted Flame .bandcamp.com and give it a listen, maybe even spend money on it.
Yeah, it's full of club bangers. Sounds like
it is not full of club bangers. It is dreary synth doom. I guess one last note before we get started about Inside. Spoilers ahead. I mean, there's not much to spoil in this one, but
yeah, there's not. I mean, you should probably go watch it. Like,
hell yeah,
yeah, it's on Netflix. Most of you have that or the ability to steal that.
Where do you want to start with this one?
Well, I thought it was interesting that you described it as a movie because a lot of people call it a comedy special, and I completely agreed that it's a movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think of it as a musical about a child star coming to grips with an absent audience.
That makes sense. I can see that. I mean, ultimately, it's the format, the comedy special if someone was going to do it alone, you know? And I think about this as being a musician who did some things for camera only during quarantine, where it's like, well, we'd normally be doing a live show, but here's a thing we're doing in the studio. And this is basically that. But he evolved it into so much more. Mm-hmm. There are definitely some reference points that we can discuss down the road, but one of them is like the Maria Bamford special, the special that she did that was a comedy special that she did in her parents' living room to an audience of her parents. And it's one of the funniest fucking things I've ever seen. I highly recommend it. I think it's her best special. And I love peak Maria Bamford. But it's similar. It's like, well, what does a comedy special look like if you're doing it literally in a home for your family? But this is even more sort of solitary, and he turned it more into like something far more cinematic.
Yeah, it's funny too. Like, this came out not too long after Kevin Hart's Fake From His House special. Like, he did this comedy special that was supposed to be, you know, him performing in his living room, and it's fucking huge. There's like 40 people there, so he's rich. So maybe that is his living room. I don't know.
Right.
But either way, it's like basically a tiny little audience show, and it is awful. It's just not funny. He just, I don't know what the deal was. He just, you know, I think he can be very funny. This special was not very funny.
Yeah.
And it also had the reek of fakeness because of like the audience was like I don't believe for a minute, and it was in his house, or at least in a part of his house that he lives in anyway.
Right. What do you think of Bo Burnham before you saw the special and now? Not as a person, I just mean as an artist.
So I had never interacted with, I had not knowingly interacted with anything that he had done, but I had seen him on Parks and Rec when he plays the cowboy, the guy who has like the ultra patriotic country songs. He's like a 17-year-old country star. It's in like the 4th season or something like that.
I don't remember that.
I didn't remember it either, but I was looking at his IMDb and I saw it, and then when like looked up the clip, then had remembered it. But I wasn't aware of him. I didn't think about him. I don't even know that I had heard the name before. And then I went back and like looked at some of his previous work, and I do not like it. Like, I would say that I don't like, the only musical comedy thing like that I've ever liked is Weird Al,
sure,
who's, you know, referenced in this clearly, and, you know, like it is considered a, you know, a vocal influence on him. Similar things like Tim Minchin. To me, whenever somebody plays the piano well, it's like a magic trick. So I already think that they are like part of an advanced race that should be leading us. Like, that's pretty much all it takes, is like the ability to like play the ivories.
Yeah.
So I have to give that a certain amount of respect. And the fact that like his writing it's very tight. It's very like, it's pretty funny. It's just too UCB cutesy for me. Like it's not my jam, but I thought this was great.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
It's funny. I had started one of I'm forgetting his specials names, but I had started one of them some years ago and turned it off. I didn't think it was bad. It was just like, this isn't my thing. I mean, comedy sort of has to be very specific. Stand-up comedy has to be very specific for me to be engaged by it. And I watched this special, Inside, and totally loved it, and went back and revisited that special that I turned off and thought it was totally hilarious.
Huh.
But I think it's possibly because I was really focused on the darkness in the humor. Almost all stand-up comedy has a lot of darkness in it. I mean, it seems to be pretty much a truism that very successful stand-up comedians are usually very fucked up and have a really dark inner world. And it seems that it was really magnified in Inside. And then watching him sort of like prance around and do all these like hyper-ironic music gestures in a live setting on these previous specials suddenly seemed kind of more interesting to me because I found there was some like more pathos going on.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't like. I would not say that all of his previous specials are bad or anything like that. Like, it's not like I find like even the way he does things. Like at first, I was like, man, this is just like a really on the sleeve LA left wing political like bloviation, but it's not. It's like he starts from that point and will like sort of pull it back and investigate and sort of reveal that off-the-shelf opinion is pretty corny.
Yeah.
And then it's so interesting and honest the way he does it, where it's like, even when he's like apologizing for like being a white guy, having a voice and all this stuff, it's like, he's not really apologizing actually. Like and it's because it's like, well, what the fuck else is he supposed to do? And, he also has these extremely high level skills that, like, what's he going to do? Make content for a fucking insurance company? I mean, it's fucking ridiculous. Like he can play piano better than I can do anything. And he has an eye for cinematography. Clearly his writing is great.
Yeah.
In just the little, like what he's done with the lighting in the one room is just so incredible to me. Yeah.
On that note, I sort of feel like something that was very appealing to me in the reflection of what are you going to do during quarantine is it really felt like, well, I spent the last year just sort of accumulating Amazon packages and figuring out how to be creative and not go stir crazy. And that's kind of what he did. And this is what you get. Like, I mean, I don't know how this came together. I don't know how much assistance he had, but in the framing of it, it kind of looks like, he just ordered some shit off of Amazon and made Inside. Well,
I went pretty deep looking up whether or not it was a lie that he'd worked on himself. Because like pretty much, I mean, even like Thoreau didn't live by himself in a shack. You know what I mean? Like there's always a lie at the heart of these like accomplishments like this. But I couldn't find anything that pointed to him having not done it himself. And in the credits, it's just like color correction and sound editing is the only help he had, which is post-production seems totally fine to me. But I thought there was like almost like in this time when everybody's waiting for the government to do something and people are like blaming this and that for, there's these systemic injustices keeping me down. It's a very borderline Ayn Randian message in this thing, which is like with a credit card and some time, you may be able to accomplish this. Like he's been cut off from the thing that gives him life, which is the audience yelling at him and screaming for him. And so he's clearly, like this is a child star. This is a dude who's been famous since he was like 17 or 18, came up on YouTube. All comedians are narcissists. Even to a certain extent, all podcasters, I think. Like, obviously, I'm doing this with enough gumption to think that somebody wants to hear what I'm saying, which is ridiculous. But like this dude makes it and figures it out. And that's one of the things I really liked at the very beginning is you see him sort of like cataloging all of his different equipment. Like you see the camera, you see the light control box, you see the setup. And it almost reminds me of like when magicians like show you the cards and show you how everything is, and then they do the trick and you're still fucking blown away by it. And you've seen everything involved, like the cups and ball trick. It's all just the cups and balls, but it's the execution requires like mastery.
Yeah, it's funny saying Ayn Rand that Penn and Teller, who do so much of the revealing of how the trick is done, are such these uber objectivist capitalists themselves. It seems exactly in parallel. Their philosophy is exactly in parallel with what you just described, metaphorically.
I mean, Penn, his deal, I don't know what Teller's thing is because I've never heard
They seem very aligned.
Yeah. But Penn Jillette, he's basically like, I think what would have been like a pre-Tea Party libertarian would maybe be a good way of describing him. Or like a non-nationalistic libertarian.
Yep.
Because I've never heard him espouse any sort of idea that I would personally disagree with. He's not like...
For sure.
He's another important thing is I think that the only tolerable branch of libertarianism is the anti-war branch, which is pretty considerable. And there's a bit of a war going on with that scene right now at the moment of like people who wear like flag underwear and then people who are more concerned with like, leave me the fuck alone. And he seems to be on that. But I think anyone who has ever had to develop a skill by themselves in isolation probably has a little of that in them, you know, like, cause you like see what it takes to achieve a thing and you achieved it. I mean, like by yourself, probably like maybe your mom got you a keyboard or something like that. But like, it's not like a Rockefeller fund or something, you know?
Yeah. But speaking back to the possibly implied Ayn Randian statement being made here is it's funny how much he bounces back to these ideas of privilege and his whiteness, which is a part of his shtick. It's definitely in the air for people to be constantly addressing these things and calling each other out and calling themselves out and enacting some sort of performance of justice. But at the same time, it really does demonstrate like, yeah, all you need is a phone. Like really, he does cool things with lighting. He does cool things with editing. He does like these tricks with his vocals and stuff like that. But this entire special basically could have been done on a phone, on just like an old iPhone. And it would have been not that much less amazing and impressive, which comes back to something we've talked about quite a bit about cinema, that the bar can be set quite high in filmmaking because the cost is usually so high. It's prohibitive. And that's why fewer risks are taken. That's why there's so much gatekeeping. But with this, it's kind of proof that like, there's no gatekeeping. This is basically a YouTube hot take video. This is basically, but a lot of them put together and almost all of them are really good.
Yeah. I mean, in some ways, I think it's, well, the music thing is pretty impressive, but like the thing I was reminded, there were two things I was really reminded of watching this is all of Spalding Gray's movies.
Yes.
And ContraPoints' videos.
Yeah. Especially
with the lighting. Like, cause I think that was, I mean, I haven't watched, I'm sure that she has influences that kind of led to that, but I mean, I think she's even mentioned like certain like Gucci shows, like stage lighting for fashion shows is a big influence for her. But I don't really think anybody was like playing with lighting that much before her. And now you see it all over the place.
For YouTube videos?
Yeah, for YouTube videos. And I think for her, Casey Neistat was like a very cinematic YouTuber. And I think that we're going to start seeing a lot more of that, especially now that these like YouTube production houses, it's kind of interesting. You see these YouTube like influencer houses build up and they'll get, you know, everybody's going to be a star, but people seem to be sort of like gravitating into roles, almost studio roles. So you'll see like the same guy running the soundboard for 3 different podcasts and the same person has now become a camera person. And so the move for YouTube seems to be almost making these like Conan O'Brien level, like talk show type situations. So, I mean, like we talked about this with Twitch before, like I think that that's like the future of entertainment, visual entertainment.
Oh, totally. And I think that this is I don't know if the word is hallmark, but it's definitely a signifier of that shift is going very deep into to the Twitch and YouTube and Instagram and TikTok aesthetic choices and rolling them all together into a sort of grander statement than just merely an accumulation on your YouTube channel.
Yeah, this special is going to be a Clerks moment for some kids.
Yeah.
You know, because some kids are gonna be like, you know, some kid who's like mom made him take piano forever or whatever is gonna look at this and realize what's possible, and he's gonna make a movie. And it's going to be, you know, it might eclipse this. It might be cooler. Or, I mean, I think calling this like the Pulp Fiction of one person YouTube videos is a little much, but like it's definitely more like the Clerks. Like, because, you know, I looked up the cost of all this stuff, that like anything that I could find on Amazon. I was like, okay, could I like basically get his gear pack?
Right.
And I think it's like about 15 grand worth of stuff, which is like
the camera is the most important.
It's $3,600
thing.
Yeah.
Everything else is pretty like $50 here, $50 there.
I was thinking like if you had to buy the keyboard, if you had to buy the mics, like all that stuff.
Well, he had one keyboard that's like literally $60 piece of shit, MIDI controller, but then his piano is probably worth a bit more.
Anyway, we're deep in the nerd territory now. Although there's enough people that follow us that love this sort of shit. So I, you know, sorry folks that aren't into that stuff. But the broader point is that like I just read an article in Forbes that talked about film degree master's students that have like $300,000 worth of debt and are barely able to make more than 40K as assistants in Hollywood.
Yeah.
And it's like if you're one of those people, like you should probably just kill yourself and hope for resurrection.
Start over.
Like hopefully reincarnation is a thing. I'm sorry for your choices you made. But if you're 17 and some guidance counselor tells you you need to go to college and you want to go to college for film, like maybe you shouldn't. Maybe you should look at something like this and realize what's possible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure. I think that it's worth thinking about what came before this other than, so there's the direction of this is definitely pooling different aesthetics in two ways. I feel like, it's pulling from social media and the way people address selfie culture in a certain sense. This is sort of a selfie with a piano in a way.
And he plays specifically with like aspect ratios of different apps and the visuals.
Hopefully. But it's also riffing on different forms of performance. Right before we started rolling, Monique had referred to this as cabaret, which I think it really is in a certain sense. But he does sort of each section, each song, each part, you know, one's like a social media post. One is like a children's television song segment. One is like a corporate promotional video. There's one where he's sitting on a stool with the one hard white light like he's at some comedy club. You know, so he's sort of riffing on these different forms of performance, but he's doing it solo.
I like the Twitch one when he's like the streamer in the corner.
God. That was my favorite part.
That's my second favorite part, but it's really like I think the whole like white women of Instagram thing, what it actually is to me is my favorite piece.
That was great.
Yeah.
The sort of recursive loop part reminded me of, do you remember the Monty Python segment? I think it was called It's the Mind. Like tonight on It's the Mind, we're going to be studying the phenomenon of deja vu.
Oh, yeah.
And then the theme song kicks on again and he is sort of startled and good evening, tonight on It's the Mind, we're going to be studying the phenomenon of deja vu. And he goes into his monologue and then the theme song kicks on again and he's sort of stuck in a loop. It was kind of like that. Like watching someone sort of like redouble over and over.
Yeah.
But I think other than different forms of performance, there are performances that I think about as being precursors to this in terms of stand-up comedy specials, at least. Definitely Hannah Gadsby's Nanette, in that it's a comedy special that very easily leads you to go, is this a comedy special? Is someone coming unraveled in a room with a lot of editing in front of an SLR? Do we call it a comedy special? The Maria Bamford special that I referred to, but also especially, do you know Chris Gethard? He's a stand-up comedian. He's very self-deprecating. He's pretty fucking funny. He did a special called Career Suicide for HBO, which is basically him coming out and explaining his entire life in substance abuse and being on and off psych meds and his bouts of anxiety and depression and all the fucked up stuff he's been through. when it's funny, it's super funny, but it's mostly just watching someone really pour it out more than anybody can. It's really raw. And it was funny, I was listening to an interview with him recently, and he was kind of joking, like, yeah, everybody's all excited about Hannah Gadsby. I did this shit 10 years ago and nobody cared. Like, he's like, why didn't anybody care that I already did this? He wasn't being bitter. He was being funny about it. Like, hey, I hated myself before she did. What's up?
Well, you have to be a protected class to get riches these days, I think.
Is that what happened?
I think I mean, I didn't make the rules, Mark. It's just important to know them.
Anyway, I think that those things kind of rolled into this moment, this piece, because it is very dark. And, you know, it does start off with him basically saying to the camera, I hope this special can maybe do for you what it's done for me these last couple of months, which is to distract me from wanting to put a bullet in my head with a gun.
Yep.
Which he doesn't say as a punchline. Like, he says it with pretty full commitment.
Yeah. And he addresses that line later where he's like, I'm not going to kill myself. Like, it's kind of like this reassurance sort of thing. I thought was pretty interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, there's just so many little things that I thought, like, I laughed very hard at. Like, one of the things that the thing that made me laugh the hardest was the Malcolm X Weird Al Venn diagram. It's the bit where he's talking about comedy will solve everything and he has the flow charts and all that stuff. But when he's like, that Malcolm X Weird Al, because I had seen a still of that in some article before I'd seen it. And I was like, oh my God, I got to know how this works out. Like, because it's like, I hadn't seen any like getting canceled or anything like that about him. And he also seems pretty scandal free. Like when this is something I thought was interesting. He has that whole part where he talks about like, he's like confessing all the bad comedies he's done or all the evil shit or whatever. Like, there's nobody trying to cancel Bo Burnham, man. I didn't see anybody that like was like, oh, he, you know, text messaged an underage girl or any of the common traps of comedians. Like, he seems pretty clean with that stuff.
Someone will find a way.
I'm sure. Like, nobody's got clean hands, you know, especially if you're like, nobody performing has clean hands. Yeah. I would say, you know, it's just once you're famous enough and people just show up at your hotel to suck your dick, it's just hard to maintain like any sort of semblance of decency.
Yeah.
I thought like a lot of the small gags like that were pretty fun. Like when he's talking about, you know, the smooth cut and just cuts really abruptly.
Yeah.
That is hilarious. The sock puppet whole deal
was pretty good. The Marxist sock puppet trying to start a revolution and is put in its place very swiftly.
Yeah. And very quickly and very easily. And I also like the sock puppet. It's kind of funny. Like when he gets really like political in his monologues and stuff like that, it's not necessarily like left or right. It's like borderline Alex Jones. Like when he's talking about like the punishing, you know, the sock puppet thing about the global elites and all that shit. That's straight out of like Alex Jones territory.
Yeah.
And I think though, like I think it's like the future of like the third party is that sort of thing where it's going to be like people who are like definitely pro-gay marriage. They want marijuana to happen. They believe because they've seen it with their own eyes that media elites are lying to them about fucking everything in order to like get money for these candidates who do nothing for them.
Yeah. And
to see a dude who like to me would be like I mean, some of these speeches are basically Patrick Bateman out of American Psycho when he's trying to like explain apartheid. Like it has the feel of that sometimes.
Yeah.
But to feel like somebody like that sort of like addressing the mask slippage and addressing the existence of the cathedral. Like, it's very interesting to see it like starting to mix a little bit in very tasty and interesting ways.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, Rick and Morty has a little bit of that, you know, it's like the political direction of that, which is this like, not even mistrust, but this like anticipation of disappointment from the people who would be in charge.
Yeah. And it almost positions itself in some sense as being, and I know this doesn't exist, but outside of ideology, just looking at things frankly, not having an ideological belief that AOC is going to come and save us, that QAnon is telling us some sort of truth, that if I just actually, I hate to use common sense, but like the media has lied to me, this I know. So why do I have an ideological necessity to believe anything that it has to say next?
Yeah.
I don't.
And that's totally interesting because it's like, it gets into the territory of what critical theory actually is versus what people think it is. Like the whole idea, like the fact that the words critical race theory have become like a thing that people
bananas,
know.
Yeah.
It's bananas, one, because it's like I remember studying that shit at Berkeley and being like, man, this is never going to be applicable to anything in my life ever again. I will never need to think about Judith Butler after this.
You were so wrong.
I was so wrong. Like I had no idea how much that degree would prepare me for this existence. And it shouldn't have. It should not have.
Agreed.
But like the thing is, like with critical theory, it's like the tool that you can use to take apart the patriarchy also can be used to take apart the way that you take apart patriarchy.
Fully.
And it's turtles all the way down, you know, and there's no stopping it. And ultimately, because it's rhetoric, it's a tool of wrestling power away from one entity and pulling it into your hands, hopefully, or like dispossessing it of them and like handing it on to somebody else who you think deserves it more, which is a total fucking cuck move. But, you know, like, I mean, if you're going to like take power, you should fucking take it and try to run things yourself. It's interesting that like one of the things is like a group that never has power, but is able to like pull power like that is almost always immediately corrupted by the power. Like, cause they've got, it's like almost
absolutely.
like constantly.
Well,
that
that is literally what cancel culture is.
Yeah.
Is you give someone an iota of power, like say, give them a megaphone online to sort of like control a narrative. They will try to destroy somebody.
Yeah.
Whether or not they deserve it is actually irrelevant. It's about wielding power.
Yeah. And it made me think about this concept, which is that like Alex Jones is a conspiracy theorist, but he's also a critical theorist, because what he's doing is he's like breaking, like, for example, like the whole idea of the Epstein media elite pedophilic ring and stuff, like it was easy to make fun of that like 5 years ago. You sort of have to take it a little bit seriously now, even if you're totally opposed to his bullshit. We know that super rich people, billionaires, do super fucked up stuff. If you're racing spaceships right now, you definitely have some beaten hookers in your closet. Like there's just like, why wouldn't it be like that?
Right.
Yeah.
I agree and disagree. Well, with the Alex Jones thing, because Alex Jones says completely ridiculous, hysterical things. But just because someone screams about pedophiles and then it turns out there are some pedophiles doesn't mean that his paranoia is confirmed. It means that he has been ranting about random shit for so long that at some point he's going to be right.
Right. But what I'm saying is like what he's doing while he's doing that is like trying to destabilize a narrative. And that's what critical theory does, is it destabilizes a narrative.
All right. I can see that.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah. It's just a method of doing it. And I think that like, you know, a piece like this isn't necessarily doing that, but it might be informed by that a little bit. Right. I mean, just the conversation of like white privilege and all that stuff, that's straight out of, critical race theory. That's what it is. And like for him to introduce it to a comedy special, it's interesting to see how like mainstream it's become. It's just on a show. You know, this would have been on HBO probably in the 80s.
Right. Yeah. But backing up that is what you were saying earlier is kind of exactly what is demonstrated by the sock puppet. That the sock puppet is just like ranting, full of self-righteousness.
It has no power.
Zero.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter how right and righteous it thinks it is. It's going to bow down.
Yeah. The other thing I thought was interesting, and maybe it's me reading a little too into it, is like when he threatens to pull it off and he's like, oh, I go into a liminal space where there's non-existence. That's sort of the state of the activist away from social media. You know, like the really toxic members of the alt-right that have been deplatformed. Well, that's it. Like Ben Shapiro himself said that when Milo Yiannopoulos was banned off of Twitter, his anti-Semitic comments towards him went down by 85%. So it's like, you know, you're this loud voice, but the person who's actually in control of the media company can take that voice away at any time. I thought that was just a really clever moment in the piece. What did you think about the music itself? Like his actual songs, like the construction of them?
I think they're super smart. None of it is to my taste. I don't know that it matters though. I mean, I have no interest in dissecting who he is and what his taste is and what is he going for, because I don't fucking know and I don't presume to know. But I don't know that he is writing music that is to be liked. Like, I don't think it doesn't feel as if when he is writing a comedy song, he's writing a song that can be appreciated on musical terms beyond maybe like ironic or nailing a genre or playing with genre, but it doesn't like sit in with the typical type of pleasure we derive from music. It seems to be more of a vehicle.
So that was my initial thought on it. Then I watched like a reaction video from a couple different people, and one of the people was a pretty high level guitar player, like one of those dudes who like listens to a song that's super complicated and goes, "Oh my God, let me show you how it's done." And he can play it right then. You're like, "Oh my God, it's a magic trick." But he was like kind of breaking down all the like really interesting like chord progressions and modulations and stuff. So I was like, "Oh, is that going on?" You know, and as not a musician, it just looks amazing to me. But then another friend of mine who's quite accomplished as a musician and piano player was just like, "This is trash." So I can't place it.
I mean, I've seen some of the live stuff he's done that was some of the piano playing he did was far more accomplished, and his chord progressions were complicated and weird and unnecessary to tell a dick joke. You know?
And I appreciate that.
I totally
I think
love
that's
that shit.
great.
I think he does some musically interesting things inside, but I don't know how to put it. So, are you very familiar with the band Sparks?
Not at all.
Okay, so Sparks are this band from LA. They started in sort of the 60s, mostly the 70s, but they really became popular in the 80s. They worked with Giorgio Moroder. They worked with Tony Vacanti. They did a duet with Jane Wiedlin from the Go-Go's. They did a whole album with Franz Ferdinand. They're from LA. It's hard to associate them with being American because they're so iconoclastic. So their music is really funny, but it's not comedy music. It's actually closer to something like Queen or Frank Zappa or Mr. Bungle.
Yeah.
But the lyric writing is incredibly adept and kind of brilliant. And I think that they play with this idea as well is, I mean, they're pop musicians. They're writing music as music, and it's not comedy. It's not Weird Al. It's not for the Dr. Demento specials. It is, I think, music to be listened to alongside whatever else you're into listening to that day. But the way it's composed, the way it progresses, and the lyrics are so uncanny and weird that it's not unlike this Bo Burnham special. It's just on my mind because Edgar Wright, the director of, you know, Shaun of the Dead and all those boy movies, he did a documentary about them that just came out. So it's like in the theaters, but you can also rent it for $20, which I did. And it's his best movie by far. Yeah.
I like him quite a bit as a director. I think he does really interesting stuff with like
such a one note.
Yeah, but I like that note. You know, it's like when Andy Connors is talking about how I like the blast beat. I don't really care how it gets to me.
Right.
Like that's kind of how I feel about. It's almost like he has these well-timed visual puns, and it just to me it's silly, and I just really dig that shit.
I totally see that. For me, the one note that I see in him that I dislike is his one note is a total loser who does nothing to accomplish anything in their life gets the girl in the end, despite still being a loser and accomplishing nothing. It is the purest example of like, it's like a Mary Sue inverted. Women are so generic in his movies. They're painfully clueless and useless, but they're trophies to be won in the most like tired way. But they're always won. But the guy never actually even does anything to win them.
Well, I mean, Shaun of the Dead saves the day.
Movie. But like, but how?
I mean, it's very weak hero's journey stuff. Like, I mean, if you told me his movies were like Dan Harmon Story Circle movies, I probably wouldn't be surprised, you know?
Yeah.
But again, to me, what is clever about his movies, especially Baby Driver, would be the most obnoxious example.
I fucking hate that movie.
Yeah, like it's not his best movie, but he does sort of stuff that like Bo Burnham does, which is like the soundtrack is communicating with the visual aspect in a way that is not often done. And I think that's one of the things I think is so great about Inside is that the visual elements are telling the story just as heavily as the music or even the lyrics or the monologues are. Like it's like a great film, like The Shining or something like that. The camera is creating the feeling of claustrophobia, along with the slow zoom ins, along with speaking about claustrophobia or whatever. Another thing I love, COVID's not really mentioned at all.
I really wanted to get into that. Yeah, I don't think he uses the word quarantine either. So part of the appeal of this, watching it right now, is he went through something that most of us went through recently. You know, I mean, to say the most obvious thing, nothing could be more obvious to talk about right now than like, yeah, we all went through quarantine, you know, but like we see in his experience something that we glimpsed. He's alone in this room. I think he's actually married with a kid. I don't fucking know. I don't know what his actual personal story is, but it actually doesn't matter. In this piece of cinema, he is completely alone in a room for over a year.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point, because the one criticism I did see was sort of like the thorough criticism, like, were you really in the room the whole time? So the fuck what? This is a movie.
Totally.
Like, you know, like fucking Buster Keaton fall off of a train? No, I mean it's just a movie.
Honestly, almost all the criticisms I found of this movie are really the most shallow sort of observations about art.
Well, it's like there's this thing where people just want to take something as it is. It's so weird because it's like it comes from like sort of a theory background where you would watch Lord of the Rings and be like, well, actually this is about the advancing of the Industrial Revolution against minority populations in Southern England. Like that's that. And you would do like in the rhetoric department, especially, you would want like a funny take or even an odd take. Like, so I wrote about like the Terminator films as this vehicle of subverting like masculine coming of age stories with like a feminist edge. That's the sort of thing we do. Now it's almost the opposite, where it's like the hard biographical events of the person's life will be slapped on top of the piece of art. And years ago, the whole idea of like, you know, the auteur theory was like that you almost had to go out of your way to bring in the person's personal life into the thing. Now it's like the personal life is the flat line. But it seems like the only negative criticism for this piece was really dumb.
Yeah.
And in a very specific way.
Well,
it's almost like not getting the joke way.
Yeah. And an extension of what you were just saying, the little I did come across in criticism, because I tried to keep away from it as much as possible, is people talking about his privilege and people talking about like, oh, this privileged rich guy complaining, as if it's relevant to the piece, as if it's yet another opportunity to find a way to take someone down using cliched political catchphrases of this moment.
Yeah.
As if it has a bearing on that someone created actually something really unique and interesting, that we have to, that it's more important to invalidate it based on some hypothetical, autobiographical, biographical information about the artist.
My favorite section of this whole special was White Women of Instagram. And I really liked it a lot for two reasons. One, it's just funny. Like, it's clever, it's hilarious. It could be a TikTok video that people did. But there's two things that happen in the background. In the foreground, there's the funny thing, you know, making fun of white women on Instagram. It's such an easy, hacky joke. And it's so hacky that I was like, something else is going on here. So I started paying attention to it a little closer. And there's two things. One is when he's mimicking the filters and poses and performances of the women of Instagram, he is at his most attractive. And like he physically looks the most attractive. Like his eyes are super blue. Like every shot is really composed. And then later in the special, there's clips of him trying to set these shots up, and you realize it's no small thing to lay down and take a picture of yourself with like flowers on your eyes placed perfectly. I mean, it's not like rocket science or anything, but they're aesthetic choices. What do you want these white women to be doing? Like back to like the Victorian age and knitting and shit? Like this is just a way to be creative that's accessible to many people that people take advantage of. And so it's almost like while he's actually making these things, there's a bit of an appreciation for it because he's doing them so well. And it's he's not doing them so well because they're easy. He's doing them so well because he has like a talent for it, which is kind of cool. But the best moment in the song is, so the whole scene uses the aspect ratios of Instagram the whole time. And then there's the little breakdown where it's the woman talking, like memorializing her mother. And then the camera kind of spreads out a little bit and it shows like this fuller view of this person. And I thought it was so smart because it's like him acknowledging in the middle of the song that people do this like for all kinds of different reasons. And, he's recognizing the humanity of the person. The way it's written, it sounds like he just took it from someplace. It sounds real to me. And, I just lost a parent. So like I was so high when I watched it. So I was like super sensitive. And so I'm watching it and I'm like, oh my God, there's this like really sweet moment. And then he's sort of revealing what this platform could be. And then it's almost like he's thinking like, well, maybe the white women of Instagram have it right because they're using it for this specific thing. They're not really like using it as a performance vector or a promotion vector or something like that. So I thought it was a very intricate song. But on the first time I watched it, I didn't pick up any of that. I was just like, oh, this hacky fucking joke. But the second time I watched it, I really like felt all that.
Oh, it's great.
Yeah.
Something you just said, how easy or hard it is to compose these white women of Instagram snapshots makes me, I'm backing up a bit about complaining about other people's complaints about Inside. But another thing that it seemed to come up a lot as a complaint, which blows my mind, is the sort of, I could do that.
No, you couldn't. Yeah, I mean, not you, but like, you know what I mean? Like you're full of shit. You can't do that.
Well, yes, and who cares?
Yeah.
Like, I think something that really blows my mind is people still say that about art as if the 20th century never happened, as if a very arcane, specific, evolved skill set that someone has to slave over for 40 years is the only way that people will acknowledge artistic achievement. What I'm basically saying is like, I could do that. Yeah, you didn't. And also, who cares? How does your ability to do something have any bearing on whether or not it's interesting, relevant, funny, fun, pulls at your heartstrings? Do all your favorite bands have to be adept at doing something that is impossible for you to ever achieve? No, that's not relevant. It doesn't matter if it is complicated or simplistic or whatever. Just like, what is it doing?
Yeah.
I just never understood. I've never understood that, and it continues to shock me that that still enters into the conversation. Because for me, actually, what is super fascinating about this is, yes, he's very good at what he does. But at the same time, there is an anyone can do this-ness to it that makes it more interesting. Not that anybody could be as funny as Bo Burnham, have his timing, edit in the way. It's the fact that he took these, again, we're sort of going back to the beginning of what we were talking about, but anybody could just grab these tools and make this movie. And that is actually what is so fucking interesting.
And anybody should. Like
everybody should fucking do this. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, I was thinking back to, a little personal moment for me was like when from like the ages of like 12 to 14, I got very interested in my dad's camcorder. And he had like one of the ones that was like you sling it over your shoulder and it had the whole VHS thing hanging off the side. It was like a big monstrosity. And I made movies in my room by myself for like 2.5 years. And there's like a dozen videotapes that my mom has of me making all these like weird movies.
I got to call your mom and get those.
No,
I want to see them.
Yeah, I don't think they'll ever see the light of day.
Oh.
I think actually a lot of them were like Katrina destroyed, which is kind of a bummer.
Oh, shit.
Like, so I made those movies. And I was thinking about like just how much fun and how fulfilling it was. And then back then, there was no chance of it becoming anything. Like you couldn't even get a scholarship doing something like that. And now I think if I had just stuck with it, I'd probably be a filmmaker.
Right.
Like, I mean, I've been listening to a lot of Quentin Tarantino interviews with that. His new book came out, which is excellent. And you realize the thing about him was like, he became obsessed with a thing when he was like 11 and just never stopped being obsessed with it. And that is just, that's how people become geniuses. They just never stop the thing that they were interested in when they were 11.
I think of it more, I don't disagree, but I think of it more that is what makes people interesting. more than maybe good at it. I mean, obviously, getting good at something takes time and determination and all that. But someone who's like really obsessed with something when they're a tween and then decades later they're still obsessed with it, that person's probably someone you want to have over for dinner, you know, or learn what they have to say about that thing.
I guess what I'm trying to bring it back to is like being stuck in a room by yourself is not the worst fate. And this film makes it out to be like it's this existential terror. And I think the interesting thing is like this, there are a lot of the commentary in like forums and stuff about this where people are like, oh, I just related to it so much. I didn't really relate to it because I haven't had a particularly bad time during this whole COVID deal.
Same.
And I like that he doesn't mention COVID because it, in some ways it's just like an isolated person going mad. And that makes it more fun.
And I think that is partly what is interesting about the way he frames it, is because at the very beginning, you know, you see through the door this blinding light coming from the outside. And then at the end, he goes and enters the light, but then, you know, he's terrified and it's actually dark and terrifying outside.
Yeah.
So it becomes just about being alone, just about being in a prison cell. You know, it's not specifically about quarantine or COVID.
Yeah.
It's actually just about being trapped. And it doesn't matter why.
Yeah. Do you know anybody who like can't just be alone? Have you ever met people like that? Like in S.E. Hinton's Rumblefish, the main character, Rusty James, talks about how he just can't stand to be alone. And like I've met people like that who'll just call you up and be like, what are you doing right now? Like nothing. You want to come with me to the bank to deposit some money? No, I don't, because I'm by myself, enjoying this time by myself. Like my wife's a little bit like that. She's always like, not so much anymore, but she used to be really like super social, and there'd always be people around.
Yeah.
It's just strange to me that a dude like this, who developed these skills that demand to be developed in isolation, would not be comfortable being alone. But that to me, that's where it gets into the weird of like my read on this was that it was like a horror movie from the perspective of a child star who is no longer, it's like his stardom kept going, but instead of like falling off like Corey Feldman did, the quarantine stopped him.
Yeah.
You know, and then he no longer had access to this thing that like gave him energy.
Well, it's a funny thing is I know so many people who, probably I can speak for you too, but like all of our social circles, there are two types of people. There are people who are like, well, my life's pretty much the same as it was before quarantine, so I don't give a shit. And then there are people like me who like, yeah, I actually really miss being around people. That started on like day 2 of quarantine, of like missing just being in public.
The only thing I missed were gyms. Like that was the only public
which have
thing.
people.
Yeah. But they're a select group of people. It's
totally.
Like, yeah.
Well, it's not far from what I was thinking about, is that even all of the people who are like, I don't care about people anyway, they all got lonely. Like just because you are a misanthrope and quote, don't like people, being around people anyway, doesn't mean after like 2 months, you're going to be like, yeah, but I haven't even talked to like someone checking out my groceries and it's fucking intense.
Yeah. For me, like, I guess I sometimes play around with the idea that I'm like this misanthropic person who wants to just, you know, pull revolvers on people or whatever. But the truth is, it's not that I don't like other people. It's I'm just exceptionally comfortable being alone.
Yeah.
And in fact, just really like quiet. Just, you know, even noise, like car noises and stuff bothers me.
Oh, something I was going to say, I'm sort of fusing a couple of things we've touched on, like, is this a special? What kind of, is this a comedy special or is this cinema or whatever it is? What I think is remarkable about it is also that it's simultaneously something we've all seen before. Like every segment in it is something we've seen before. But cumulatively, it's kind of something we've never seen before. And I don't want to overstate that because it's not like this completely came out of absolutely nowhere. But I have to say that my experience of watching it was like, oh, everything here is totally familiar. I am seeing something new. It
reminded me of Tranny Shack in a lot of ways. Because when I would go to Tranny Shack, you would hear a song that you knew, and it was chosen by a drag queen for performance. And you're like, you kind of knew where it was going, but it would go off the rails. Yeah. You know, like there would be like a non-obvious choice. And the whole thing reminded me a lot of drag in different ways, like especially like the lower, like more punkish end of drag where you just have to make do with whatever, improvised lighting and stuff like that. Like one of the things I thought was just so funny and clever was, well, two things that he did with the projector in the sexting song, like the use of the emojis is like patterns and stuff. I thought was hypnotic and as interesting as any Marvel movie is visually. And then the one scene where he's doing a song and he has the phone behind his back and it's on the white screen.
I really was like, how is he doing that? Oh my God.
He's just literally flashing the phone. And what's super cool about it, it's on the snare. It's not on like a normal beat. It's on this like weird off-kilter snare.
Yeah.
So it's not just him being like fashion, you know, or whatever. It has this like sort of like odd time signature thing that it's tied to, but it's also super lo-fi and very dramatic. And like lo-fi and very dramatic is what I associate with Tranny Shack.
Totally.
You know, and the other thing I thought was really interesting was the way he chose to portray his body. Like I would for sure wanted to have been in better shape before I filmed myself like that. But then he's also like, you know, I think doing push-ups at one point. He has like the exercise bike. So, you know, not totally out of shape, but like it's Hollywood, man. I don't know.
Totally.
Yeah. Especially because I would have not thought of this until I talked to somebody else, but people consider himself sort of a comedy heartthrob.
I can see that.
I guess I could see it too.
Less in this special, but if you see like his other specials,
when he's prancing around
swagger
on stage, he has like a presence.
Yeah. There's not a lot of swagger in this. Like he's definitely, you know, you can't hide your charisma under a wiry beard and messy hair.
I sure have tried.
Monique and I have talked about that before.
Yeah, no, you guys have always been like, you should cut your hair and shave. Like I've seen that and it's not great.
Did I ever tell you about the thing Monique said to, I'm not going to say which friend she said this to. This was when like one day all gays started having beards. Like that was a while back. At this point, it's hard to think that actually started at some point.
Yeah, I remember the first gay man that was not a bear that had a beard. I had a conversation with him about his beard.
Yeah,
at Lime when I was working at that bar, and he was just like, I just think it gives me an edge of masculinity. And the way he said it was like the gayest way you could possibly say it.
Yeah.
But I remember thinking like, you're right, bro. This is great. You look good. Yeah. And he was like, thanks, man.
But then a couple of years, probably, I don't know what year that was, but a couple of years later, probably like I could not distinguish half of my friends in a dark bar because they all had the exact same facial hair. But I just remember Monique remarking to one of our friends, someday you're going to wake up and realize you wasted the most beautiful years of your life hiding behind that stupid beard.
See, I had a good run. I had like from like 2000 to 2003, like that was like, you know, the Strokes were really popular. You could be a skinny guy with shaggy hair and destroyed clothing.
Yeah.
And it kind of worked. And so I consider that like my window. And after that, it's all been downhill. Like, and really like what I've always wanted to look like is Gandalf. And it's happening.
It is happening.
Yeah, yeah.
Good job.
Yeah. So I'm reading like this Kurt Vonnegut book, Man Without a Country, right now, which is sort of his wit and witticism. And his first essay has this quote from Freud where he's like, humor is a response to frustration. And I thought about that when I was watching this. Yeah. It really made me think about this. And in the same essay, he talks about how he grew up in the Great Depression. And in the Great Depression, like this terrible national moment of reckoning, there was an explosion of great comics. Mm-hmm. And I don't know about if there's an explosion of great stand-up comics, but I have watched some really funny YouTube channels lately, like stuff that is just like Flagrant 2 is totally amazing. Chael Sonnen, he's an ex-UFC guy. His just like sports talk stuff is really great. And what's really fun to me is seeing people do sort of the old school, like there'll be a sports show. There'll be like a late night type show, interview format show. It's like they're using the bones of this old format, but like kind of in their own new way. It just feels very punk rock to me. But it's never going to be really punk rock because it depends on these giant fucking media companies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's true.
What I'm hoping is that some of these psychotic libertarian billionaire types will just, instead of going to space, they'll just Like, what would be so badass if somebody just created an ad-free open source video platform, like they just did it for the world. Like,
see, the problem is that would be with good intentions. It would immediately be taken over by like white supremacists, and like this is the problem we are in right now with everything being so very online, is that as soon as people are like, you know what, fuck the corporate elite, fuck the media elite, we're going our own way, it just becomes 8chan.
So I've been thinking about that a lot lately too. And you're like, okay, why when you create an AI that talks on Twitter, on the internet, does it immediately start saying racist shit? You know, like why is it? And then why is it that like 8chan horribleness always seems to be the thing that happens? And my only thought was like, maybe this is the state of nature, like, in that all attempts to go away from that are actually wrong. I mean, why does it always go to that? And then it does go to that, but I think there's always like, there's a bit of school marmishness about it, because like a lot of what 4chan and 8chan does is hilarious. Like, I mean, there's definitely like, you know, the Hitler memes and whatnot, but the entire harassment of Shia LaBeouf was genius. You know, like
I just think it's a technology like anything else. I think if I can harshly rebut, here's my rebuttal.
Yes.
It's just a technology, and technologies are not innocent. I think that referring to online culture's quick descent is like saying meth is just the natural state of things. Give everybody meth and it's just, well, that's humanity. That's the way we really are. It's like, well, no, that's the way we really are on meth.
So I sort of disagree, because like, if you had you had a platform where just anything goes, you could put whatever, you could do 8chan rules, which is basically no snuff movies and no child porn. Like that, you know, that covers I think that would protect a lot of people right there. But like, say you had those rules, and you know, basically you couldn't have people being killed and you couldn't have child porn. Like that's the guardrails. But everybody has a phone. Everybody has access to it. It's not gatekeepered by anybody. Do you think it would go bad? I mean, I guess that's sort of like what the internet was. Like, because eventually,
if there's no community, like you either need, for things to not go off the rails, you need some sort of like overlord control to keep it from spiraling out of control, or you need a community to keep it from going out of control. Otherwise, the worst people in the world will have free reign. Well, and I think that's true about the block I live in. I think that's true of Twitter. I think that's true of the punk rock, you know, all ages collective venue space.
Yeah, like, I don't disagree, by the way.
Like if there isn't some form of guidance, whether we want to use a capital C control, I think doesn't matter. It's just that like, if there are no rules and the entire planet has access to it, the worst people will find each other and make something terrible. Well, like the worst people from every community will be united by not having any guidelines
until the best people come together to defeat them. So this is going to go into super uncomfortable territory. So I'm reading a book right now called Warlock by Oakley Hall, and it's kind of a classic Western. And it's kind of an amalgamation of a bunch of different Westerns, and it was written during the 1950s. And what it's about is this town that's sort of like outside of a county. So there's a certain amount of lawlessness to it. So it's basically like there is a functioning town, but it has no law. There's like a justice of the peace. There's a doctor. And then the deputy gets killed every few months by like wranglers or whatever. And then the real power are these different cattle barons that live around. And so there's not any law at all, but there's this one group of cattle barons that are basically rustlers, and they're like sort of causing all these troubles. So the town merchants, and that's the important part, the merchants come together to hire like a really like heavy duty marshal, and he comes in and like cleans the town up. Like from one perspective, like they're the good guys, but from another perspective, they're the bad guys, because they're white civilization, you know, and they sort of like lay the groundwork for all this Arizona territory to be taken over from the Apaches. But it's weird to think that like, I don't know that in our previous example, 8chan is the rustlers, because it's like if you're good or bad, it just depends on where your perspective. Like I don't know. I mean, like definitely.
I think a troll is a troll is a troll.
Yeah.
I think there is zero value in trolldom, just like I think there's
I totally disagree.
There's zero value in canceling people. I think that you can point to examples of mob justice and go like, well, yeah, but that was a good example. Like a cop taking the law into their own hands and going out and going past due process doesn't prove that due process is a bad thing.
Unless they have a cool car, like in the movie Cobra.
You know what I mean? Like, just because there is an example that's contrary doesn't mean that the core ideal is particularly flawed.
Yeah, well, I mean...
Due process is awesome. Renegade cops are not, and it doesn't matter if they're Dirty Harry mowing down genuinely bad people because the justice system is flawed.
See, this is another of those weird examples where I feel like I have become the more optimistic of the two, is because I think it's possible to have an anarchist system where you have a distributed network of content production. And I think that, like, you're right about communities do form, but you know, unless one community is attacking another community, like say you have like these right-wing trolls and their channels like attacking like a trans community or something like that. But I think that this is where it gets weird, is I think if you remove the profit motive of clicks and clickbaiting, you might have a reduction of that. It is sort of like the studies they did with the rats, where they put the rat in a room by himself and give him food or cocaine, and he just keeps going for the cocaine. But you take those rats and you put them in like a little rat paradise with the same access to the cocaine and the food, and they don't care about the cocaine anymore. They like the food and playing. So maybe if you had like something that was actually built to be equitable. Imagine if everybody on Earth got like an iPhone with the camera capabilities and everybody could put out what they wanted to. Like, do you think that would go off the rails?
Yep. Because that's what humans do.
Yeah, I guess I don't have as negative an opinion of humanity as yourself, but you know.
I like a little balance in the world.
I
don't have a very high opinion of totalitarian control, and I don't have a very high opinion of no fucking rules, anything goes.
Well, in my example of the globally distributed sort of like content network, I think the rules sort of form based on merit. I was listening to this Russell Brand video about jiu-jitsu, which is a hilarious sentence. But he's actually...
I think I saw it.
He's actually very astute about it. But what I thought was interesting, he comes from this sort of, like I don't really become so foppish, but like his sort of like anti-authoritarian, like anarcho tendencies are sort of similar to the ones I have. There's like a mirthfulness to it, I guess. But he talked about like how jiu-jitsu had made him reconsider the idea of hierarchy, which I thought was really, really interesting, where he was like, because he was talking specifically about the belt ceremony that he went to when he was a blue belt. And maybe the answer isn't like a globally distributed network of videos production. Maybe it's just a jiu-jitsu everywhere. But he was talking about how at the belt ceremony that he went to when he got his blue belt, how it was a very established hierarchy. Like you're literally getting together to celebrate a merit-based hierarchy with literal masters and students. But he said it was the most diverse and equitable thing he'd ever been to. He's like, you know, there's like these Muslim kids cheering for these Chinese kids, and there's like him, and like there's like a weird English guy, like a football type dude. But then it made me think of like war, where there's like a shared struggle. And then I went down this like path thinking about Christopher Hedges' book, War is the Force That Gives Us Meaning. And it's like, then I got super hippie. I was like, well, could you replace war with something else? And the only thing I could think of was video content, which is super fucked up. But yeah, I don't know, man. Maybe.
Well, I also think, if I may, like my thinking about, there's totalitarianism on one hand and total free-for-all anarchism on the other. I think that the more totalitarianism you have, the more you have war. If you dismantle the state, you know, in some sort of anarchist gesture, you don't end up with less violence. You end up with less war. Yeah. You probably get more violence because there's less control, street level control of people's lives. Yeah. So you're going to get violence either way. I think it's all about evolving systems, and I don't mean systems with a capital S, like oppressive systems. I mean ways of creating dynamics between people to decrease the possibilities for conflict and increase the possibilities for healthy, happy living, you know? And I think that that is the way the world creeps, is like...
That's very Steven Pinker of you.
It fully is.
Yeah.
Like, name me a decade in the past that you would have preferred to have lived in than this.
I always say famously, simply because of dental technology, none.
Yeah.
I would decline time travel.
Absolutely.
Actually, the only time travel I would accept is I would time travel to the moment where I knew about Bitcoin and it was $50 a Bitcoin and I did nothing. And that was,
totally.
That's probably the only time travel I would do.
Yeah.
And I would probably told myself to not waste any time going to college. I would have just, I would have said, don't do that. Just do this other thing.
Well, if you're going to go back in time and give yourself advice, that's a whole other thing.
Yeah.
But I do think that like in the Steven Pinker model, the things get incrementally better because of systems, not math necessarily, not scientifically necessarily, not government organization necessarily, but all of these things, all of these ways of learning and developing and passing on knowledge and all that just makes living on this planet incrementally better all the time.
I definitely think there's like, it's interesting to think about, like there are better ways of doing things. Like if you ever watch a video of like a dude making like 50 crepes on like a street corner or something like that. And it's like his movement is like savant movement.
Yeah.
And he's just making grapes or something like that. Like I often think that like no matter what there is to do, there is that level of being able to do it. And to me, if I were to like try to orient humanity towards something, it would be like, can you do the thing that you're doing as excellently as possible and teach someone else how to do it?
Yeah.
Like that would be pretty badass.
Yeah.
But instead we get Bo Burnhams inside. Well, we're a horror podcast and we're discussing this film.
That's where I wanted to go next.
Yeah. I don't particularly think that this is, I think you'd have to make a strong case that this is a horror film.
Oh,
maybe a psychological thriller. I know, but like you got to do like undergrad rhetoric paper tricks to make this into a horror movie, I think.
I mean, the reason why I thought we should cover it was not like I saw something I liked and I want to cover it. I saw it and was like, this is upsetting. This is like watching Contagion.
Mm.
As much as it's funny and as much as there are these moments of lightheartedness, like White Women on Instagram, there is a lot of like existential dread and terror. And that's how it ends. I mean, it ends really on such this dark note that the outside is that he's so lost inside and he's talking about wanting to put a bullet in his head and he's totally depressed. And we see these moments of him coming apart, could be staged, could be genuine. That's how he felt when the camera was rolling. I don't think it matters one way or the other. And then it ends and he gets to go outside and it's fucking scary out there. Mm-hmm. It's just another kind of darkness and another kind of spotlight. So I sort of did feel like there is a horror movie in this piece.
Yeah, I guess.
Oh my God. Yeah, I think it's also going back to something I said earlier where it's an easy generalization to like name a comic. That person's fucked up and is probably on Prozac or some other SSRI.
Oh, yeah.
This piece is not just like, let's say I was saying about Chris Gethard's Career Suicide, which is him doing a stand-up special where he's really rigorously going through all of his neuroses and his struggles. But this is like, you're really just sitting with this person in a room with a camera, really digging into just that sort of question of like, okay, who are you? What do you got? You're stuck in a room for a year. What do you have to offer? Mm-hmm. How are you going to occupy your time? What are you actually worth? What are you going to do next? Like you're getting doughy. You haven't had a haircut. You haven't used your social skills and your social intelligence. What are you made of? I think that's the meditation question too, is when you get deep into meditation and can silence the chatter, you start to really confront the meat in your head and see what you're made of. And it's pretty fucking scary for a while, or it can be. I mean, everybody's fucking different, but you know, once you're able to stop distracting yourself with inane dialogue and chatter in your head and you're left with just you, it's not necessarily immediately blissful and pretty. It can be a real confrontation. And I think that this piece is a sort of illustration of something like that, which is like he's clearly someone who has internal struggles. And so him stuck in a room for a year with a camera and some lights, there's a lot of struggle being illustrated.
Yeah. At least he did something.
I think it's great.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I wonder how many people were like on the cusp of being okay at comedy that will just never return to it. Like time passed.
I'm sorry.
Like I imagine, I wonder how many people who are comedians, and just thinking about his job, right, that were like close to like being a regular, but maybe you were about to get past at the Comedy Store and you would be a regular at the Comedy Store. I wonder how many people were like right there and then COVID happened and then they'll just never return to their dream.
Oh, I mean, I think that's not unlike a question like, okay, someone opened a restaurant, they had $400,000 in debt, and they're just starting to clear that debt and turn a profit in COVID, and like they had to lock the door and walk away and chase another dream. You know, it's not too dissimilar to what a lot of people are facing.
Yeah.
So I have a question.
Yeah, go for it.
So if you at the beginning of quarantine had an idea of like, I'm going to document this with a camera. At the beginning of the quarantine, you were like, I am going to document whatever this is going to look like, and I'm going to try to make it fun and funny. It's not going to be a Second Amendment rant for 13 months.
Yeah, that's not fun.
It might be. But how different do you think it would be from this? Like, what do you think? I don't know if this is a real question, but...
Okay, so one, I probably wouldn't have had any anxiety in it because I wasn't feeling any anxiety. So that would be a big thing. And I'm not like...
Same.
It didn't force me to question how I've been. In some ways, it affirmed the correctness of a lot of my choices that I had made in life.
Great.
But if I was going to make a movie, I would have probably taken... I didn't figure out a good fitness regime until about 2 months ago. I kind of cracked the code on this thing for myself. Like, I showed you my before and after pictures. They're stunning.
So hot.
In a whole couple decades of working out, I've never like looked great without a shirt on. Like, I've been strong. I've been, capable of fucking someone up, but I've never had like convincing.
You do in the minds of all of our listeners.
But I've never had like a convincing six pack, and I'm kind of on my way now, right? I would have probably like just tried to do this is what I've done to work out sort of thing. And it would be for myself. I wouldn't show it to anybody. It would just be, because what I'm doing is kind of weird. Like my whole methodology is very specific to me. Like I would never instruct anybody on what I'm doing, but I'm very pleased with how it turned out. Either that or I'll probably try to train my horrible dogs.
Ugh.
Yeah. But I mean, it's so pedestrian. Like, I mean, I guess I just, other than the small audience of this podcast, I don't really seek broader attention or infamy in any way. Like I think being famous would be a super drag.
Yeah.
So I probably wouldn't have made a movie at all.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What about you if you were doing this?
I mean, I feel
you
like
have those
I
albums
sort of
out.
did.
Yeah.
I mean, I made albums, but I also, I bought lights and started making videos
they're
about
good.
process and stuff. Thank you. What's funny is as soon as quarantine was over, I suddenly didn't have time to do them as much. And I've been writing them. I'm still working on them. But, originally I was like, I'm going to do one a week. They're just going to be super throwaway and casual. And I'm just going to talk to the camera. And then as soon as quarantine ended, I just don't have the time to do the thing that is super casual.
Fucking day job, dude. It fucks me up every day.
Yep.
If I was going to do a quarantine movie, if I was going to make a movie right now, the idea of it I had for a long time is like, I have this sort of like conflicted relationship with Oakland where I didn't love it when I moved there. It wasn't like my choice to move there. It sort of like felt like it was pushed on me, and there's a lot I don't like about it. But I also feel like outside of New Orleans, there's no other city that is more appropriate for me. And so I've sort of kind of started to, in a weird way, fall in love with it recently, like in the last year or so.
You're going to change your mind in like 2 months.
I'm sure I will, but as soon as something happens. But one of the things that's really made me like it is I talk to a lot of people in my neighborhood, especially like mutants, like people who are like, like homeless dudes or like the dude that sits in front of the corner store all fucking day on a chair doing what? Probably selling drugs, I guess. But like I've started talking to all these people, and I don't know what it is. I guess it's because I just look sort of weird that like people will open up and tell me the craziest personal shit. And I would love to just like walk around the more derelict areas of Oakland and just talk to people about their lives and do a show like that. I think would be super fun.
Yeah.
but way too. I mean, like where I want to go is also like I wouldn't go with cameras around those places either. You know, that's the thing. Like, and that's the other thing. Once you whip out a camera, the whole dynamic changes. It's one thing to be talking to some obviously stoned long hair, but as soon as he's like, "I'm making a movie," it's weird. You know.
Yeah. So I guess we hit it. I guess we covered it.
To me, the mark of like enjoying something is if I kept thinking about it afterwards, and I kept thinking about Inside after I watched it. And I think if you're a person who is producing independent media, you should definitely see this to see what is possible and what is possible with limitations. It's just a very creative endeavor.
Yeah. As you said before, I really hope this serves not as something where people go, I could do that in a derisive way, but I wonder if I can do that as a source of inspiration, the way like seeing a punk band inspires you to pick up a guitar.
Yeah, instead of like, I could do that, it's, I could do that.
Yeah.
Like, it's like a totally like slightly different.
Yep, totally. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening. Later.